Hey, what's up everybody, Isaac here with another new world video, and we are switching gears a little bit today. We are moving on from our tanking series. Well, we'll probably add a little bit more stuff here and there to this tanking series. A lot more stuff that needs to be covered. Since there is still tanking problems in New World, just a lack thereof tanks, and tanks that aren't tanking in super effective ways to be helpful for the team. But it is also important to have strong DPS. It is also important to have strong healers. Both of them will come into play. It's not just a good tank. It's not just a good DPS. It's not just a good healer. If you have the best tank in the world, you have the best healer in the world, but the DPS is just not very DPS-y, you're going to run into a lot of problems. You're not going to kill mobs fast enough, and people are going to start dropping like flies. So we're just going to have this little M10 gold Lazarus run playing in the background. I am running 5 Con. I'm running the two highest DPS weapons in the game, Greatsword and Hatchet. Not necessarily the combination that you're going to be wanting to run for every dungeon, for every situation. You know, probably the two strongest builds are either going to be Hatchet and Great Axe. That's probably going to be your most versatile all-around best build. One, you got great survivability with the Hatchet, and you have incredible utility with the Great Axe. You know, it has the ability to gather up mobs very nicely, so you could have 3 DPS running, say, 100 Con with Great Axe and Hatchet, and you can absolutely smash dungeons, even though you don't have something like, you know, say a spear to add tons of rend. It just doesn't matter because you are melting things so fast. You have so much high output DPS that, well, you're going to absolutely smash everything with just 3 hatchets and 3 great axes. But this video, it's not really going to be a walkthrough of Lazarus or anything. It's not going to be this is how you should DPS. This is more of a proof of concept to show you that, you know, I am capable as a DPS, even though all of my stuff has been tanking videos. So, running 5 Con here, running Greatsword with the least survivability you possibly can have on a Greatsword. But I do have the safety net of switching over to my Hatchet when I need it. So this is a viable build, a very viable situation. You know, you don't have the utility of somebody that has a Great Axe or a hammer for that matter. With a hammer you can do some really good stuns. But the Great Axe, the Greatsword, it does have some good utility with the fact that you can add rend, you can add some slow. And your Hatchet, with the throw ability, you can help gather up mobs, pull aggro and stuff. But yeah, very strong combination with the Great Axe and Hatchet. Not going to be as good of utility, so you probably don't want 3 people running in a group with Greatsword and Hatchet, because you're going to have some problems with gathering mobs together. You know, you're not going to have the gravity wells from the Great Axe. You definitely could do it. You could absolutely smash dungeons with 3 Great Swords and 3 Hatchets. But it certainly is helpful when you can to have a couple of axes as well. At least 1 or 2 axes for gravity wells to gather up some mobs. So, if I could name one best all-around DPSing build in dungeons, it is going to be Hatchet and Great Axe. Definitely many different viable options, but you absolutely can't go wrong. You can't ever have too many Hatchets and Great Axes in a group. It's just not possible. But it doesn't hurt to have a few other different combinations as well. For example, hammers, they can get you out of sticky situations because you can stun the enemy and you can knock down the enemy a lot, so you got great utility there. You get yourself into a sticky situation, you go ahead and you use your shockwave and it stuns the enemy for like 3 seconds, and it gives you a chance to get away, and yeah, just can pull you out of sticky situations. And of course, the Great Axe is just incredible. It has the best crowd control skill in the game, the Gravity Well, which lets you group up all of the mobs into one nice, easy to hit group, so everyone can just do heavy DPS to large groups of mobs at one time. So typically speaking, you're going to want to let your tank go in first. Like see there, we let our tank go and grab the aggro of the boss. But in this particular situation, there's an archer up top, and we want to take out that archer as fast as we can so that archer doesn't cause problems, so the archer doesn't start shooting our healer. Healer goes down, we can get into some big trouble pretty darn fast. So anytime you can, if there's a solo archer, solo range somewhere, just go ahead and try and take them out immediately as the DPS. So, see, I ran into a little problem there. These fire mutations, things explode, and you gotta be careful when you're next to edges, and I just wasn't ready to anticipate that explosion. Knocked me off the edge into my doom, unfortunately. But such is life. Gotta get better at dodging those explosions, I guess. So, yeah, strongly recommend the first weapon combination you start off with, a hatchet and great axe. You're going to be well received in just about any group. You can't ever have too many of those. But if you are straight great axe hatchet, you're gonna be doing some insane DPS with good survivability. So I would say you're not gonna really want more than one great sword and hatchet combination user per group, but it's certainly not bad. And that's why I recommend so highly the great axe and hatchet, is because pretty much no matter what your group's compromised of, struggling with these words here, but no matter the compromise of your group, you're never gonna go wrong with having another hatchet, another great axe. So if you're trying to jump into some random lobbies, you should have no problem, if you apply to a group and you have 100 con, you have a great axe, and you have a hatchet on, if you're warded in Bane, not many groups are gonna turn you down, because it's just an incredibly versatile build that's gonna do you right in pretty much every situation. The other thing that can be very good is a hammer. It's always nice to have one hammer, whether it's on the tank or a DPS. It can be helpful, definitely, to even have two hammers. That's just that many more stuns. So you can see right here in this little situation, as a DPS, I'm grabbing a little bit of aggro and pulling mobs into the group. That's not something I'm going to be recommending you do getting started off, because, typically let the tank grab the aggro, let the tank pull the mobs in. As you get more experience, you can learn situations where it's actually beneficial to help pull the mobs into the group. But just remember, you are trying to get those mobs aggro and you're trying to drag them to the tank. So if you pull a mob, you're kind of responsible for it. You have to make sure that that mob isn't going to come in and kill you or the healer. So if you pull aggro, you are responsible for that aggro. Make sure that it doesn't kill you and screw your team over. Make sure that it doesn't switch over its aggro to the healer. You take out the healer and, well, you're kind of responsible for taking out the whole team. At that point, hopefully you can recover. But that's when things get really sketchy, is when either the healer or the tank goes down. One thing I'm strongly going to recommend, you can see every now and then I'm going to be popping the pots that are on my number 6 slot, and those are Ancient Ward potions. So those are going to help you a lot, whether you anticipate you're going into a tricky situation and you have a great sword out and you want to do really high DPS, but you're going to be taking on extra damage. Well, what that does is it mitigates 15% of incoming damage. But when you have the great sword out and you're in onslaught stance, you're taking on an additional 15% damage. So basically, it just offsets those two. and lets you become neutral again. But on the other hand, if you have your hatchet out, it's going to give you an additional 15% damage absorption on top of this hatchet already having lots of survivability. So if you're going into a sticky situation where you're like, okay, I know I want to do high DPS, but we just want to zerg this thing down as fast as we can, pop your potion and go in and go ham. But the other situation is something happens, your healer goes down, your tank goes down. You go ahead and you pop one of those pods, and hopefully it allows you to survive through whatever sticky situation comes up. So especially as you get into the higher level mutations, it's going to be hard to afford using those on the low level mutations because they are very spendy and you're not really getting your return, your bang for your buck. But if you are working your way up to the M10s, and yeah, the M10s will more than pay off for those potions, whether it's in drops, whether you're selling shards. That's probably one of the biggest money makers there is in New Worlds if you're going to sell shards. But just from getting drops, you can also make crazy amount. So you aren't going to get these kind of drops every run, but just last week I got a drop that, well, you could sell for as much as you're willing to put in the work trying to sell it. I haven't sold it yet, but it is a pair of boots with all dexterity for the attribute. It has resilient, it has freedom, and it has shirking fortification. So just a random drop I got from an M10, and just that one run, well, maybe you could sell it for 3k if you just want to get rid of it. You might be able to sell it for, or not 3k, 300k. Or, if you shop around, you might be able to sell it for 500k. You might be able to sell it for even more if you want to shop and find a buyer. But either way, it is a lot of gold that you can get for an item like that. And those kind of drops, they are few and far between, but they do happen. But it's pretty common that you're going to be getting drops at the M10 level that you can sell continuously for 3k here, 4k there, 10k there, 30k there. So you're not going to be getting the 30k drops every single run, but they're not that uncommon. Whether you're getting a warded piece that you can sell, you get a really good warded piece. Sometimes you can sell them for up to like 50k. But other things you can get, you just get like a next abyss PvP piece drop. You might sell it for 30 to 50k. The Abyss stuff is the only stuff that's going to sell for, hundreds and hundreds of k gold. But regardless, every run, you're probably going to, on average, net, maybe 20k worth. Or if you want to sell your run instead, well, you can go ahead and sell that spot for like 20 to 30k. You're not going to be able to sell your spots in every group. A lot of times there's going to be groups that will refuse to let you sell shards, which, don't blame them. They're trying to get their gold run. They don't want that to be interrupted by shard sellers. Don't blame them. So, personally, I don't like to have a gold run ruined because somebody's trying to sell shards and then it causes problems at the boss. But, as long as it doesn't cause problems with getting a gold run, well, I am perfectly fine with shard selling in my groups. But, yeah, so definitely can be lucrative to get yourself into these dungeons. And if you want to be a DPS, well, that's definitely one option you can take. Definitely a little bit lower on the side of responsibilities. You don't have the same responsibilities you do as a healer. You don't have the same responsibilities you do as a tank. So not saying that you should shy away from those. In fact, I've made a whole series on tanking. Whole tanking series, guides to tanking. Trying to get more people tanking in these dungeons. And, side note, I'm just doing that so I can try and become a DPS myself. Nah, I actually enjoy tanking. But you do enough of one thing for long enough, and eventually you want to move on to some other things. So definitely still going to be doing some tanking. But at the moment I'm having a little bit more fun with DPS, so gonna be doing most of my runs as a DPS for now. Eventually, probably gonna move on to doing more healing in these dungeons, and perhaps I'll move on to doing some healing guides, but for now, we're working with this DPS and stuff, so maybe I should put a healer set together for this week. Try and get a few healing runs in. What do you guys think? If you really want me to, I probably will. The only thing is, I don't know if I have a great healing set for Ancient, and the other one is Lost, and I don't know if I have a great healing set for Lost or not. Probably the best healing set I would have together would be a Corrupted healing set. So, I guess I could probably... I'm actually pretty low on gold right now, so... Definitely have items I could sell, but I do have to flip those items, and then I could craft myself a nice healing set. But anyways, not too sure that I'll get along to that within this week. Maybe next week or something I'll get working on the healing guides. But it definitely takes a full team. It's not all about just having a good tank. Just because the tank goes down doesn't mean you can start blaming the tank. There's many reasons that could happen that your tank goes down. Or just because your healer goes down doesn't mean you can start blaming your healer. Just because your DPS goes down doesn't mean you can start blaming your DPS. Just pick them up, move along, and keep things going. A good team isn't going to start blaming each other. They're just going to pick up their teammates. Somebody makes a mistake, well, you're going to cover for them. You know, the healer goes down, what you going to do? You're going to make sure you're good at dodging mechanics and kiting and keeping yourself alive. You know, have your ward pots available for those type of situations. Have your heals available for those type of situations. And, you know, have an escape plan. Your tank goes down, it's kind of the same thing. Well, you know, as long as your healer's still alive, you can still find some good heals, but the mobs do hit pretty hard, so even if you're sitting inside of a heal and you're getting hit by a large group of mobs, definitely can still go right on down. So, don't start blaming the other teammates, just pick up a little extra responsibility on your own shoulders and get it done. So let's get into a little bit more depth discussion about your responsibilities as a DPS. Your responsibilities, they are going to vary a little bit from dungeon to dungeon and from place to place within a dungeon. There are going to be certain places within certain dungeons where you are going to have to take on certain responsibilities that are different than your average, you know, your normal walkthrough, your normal spot. But as a DPS, your job is typically going to be grabbing all the resource nodes. You don't want your tank grabbing the resource nodes. You don't want your healer grabbing the resource nodes. Your healer needs to be keeping everybody alive. Your tank needs to be moving forward and grabbing aggro on everything. So you should be grabbing the resource nodes, and other than that, your responsibility is to just delete everything. Go to town doing DPS. But you don't want to do that too soon. You don't want to do it before the tank grabs aggro on everything. So you let the tank go in, you let the tank grab everything together, and then you try to AoE everything down. Your other responsibility, keep your healer alive. You see a mob that's jumping on your healer, healer gets some aggro. Your responsibility is to peel off that mob for your healer. Peels for your heals, like we like to call it. So, you see a mob that branches off and goes take after healer, go and chase it down. Interrupt it, use a crowd control skill if you have to, do a bunch of damage to it. Anything you can to get that mob to stop chasing your healer. If it comes down to it, it's better off that you get knocked than your healer gets knocked. Preferably you don't get knocked either. You can see here I do get a little bit ahead of the group, but I do know that we just want to gather up these 3 mobs, so I just chuck out my hatchet at the mob that's off in the distance. And you know, I do, being a main tank, you know, I understand the concept, so I know that we got to gather the mobs, so I throw a hatchet at the far mob and gather it together with the group. Definitely not something I'm recommending everybody do, because you might not have the experience to, You know when the right time is to gather an extra mob to the group versus not to grab an extra mob and add it on to the group. Start adding too many mobs to a group and you can get your whole group killed. But one thing you want to make sure is anytime you are grabbing aggro of a mob, you're dragging it to the group. You're dragging it to the tank. You're dragging it to the AoE heals so that mob gets gathered into the group. You're not just going and fight it solo. So that one thing that happens is you'll see DPS, they'll just randomly go and start attacking a mob. And then they'll start running away, and that mob will keep chasing them, and that mob will kill them, and they'll cry that, well, what are you doing, tank? You're supposed to be grabbing aggro. No, that's your fault as a DPS for being an idiot. So if you do grab an aggro of a mob, it's fine. Just pull it into the group. Don't go running away, fighting it on your own, then cry when you get knocked because you're trying to solo fight a mob somewhere off in the distance. So here you can see I do actually go around and I grab aggro. I got the hatchet, so I have that, I have that ranged ability to grab some aggro. And when I throw my hatchet at that boss, being the mutation that it is, the boss drops his fire on me, and it drops that fire where it's somewhere that it's not going to affect our group. So I know exactly where I'm going to. So I throw hatchets at the distance mobs, and then I run and stack on this guy right here in the water. So typically what you're going to want to do is every time you can, you stack on the ranged guy. So if you can grab aggro of individual melee guys, but then you bring it to wherever the stack is going to be, wherever the big AoE heal is going to be, wherever the tank is going to be, then the tank can go ahead and drop a taunt and pull that aggro off of you, or he can do some DPS and pull that aggro off of you, or worst case scenario, if you do still have that aggro, but you got a nice heal that you can sit in, well, it's going to be alright, Typically, you should be able to survive a mob attacking you while you're within the heal. If you can't, well, you need a little bit extra practice, and, whatever. Maybe you have to crank up your con a little bit. You don't want to go too high on the con because your job as DPS is to kill mobs, and if you can't DPS fast enough, the mobs are surviving forever, the dungeon's taking forever to run. When you start getting into those mutations that have time limits before you start losing points, well, you're not going to get your gold runs if you don't have high enough DPS. So, yeah, the basic standard I would suggest that you aim for as soon as possible. Become a light armor DPS and get down to 100 con. At 100 con, with 3 DPS in light armor at 100 con, you can absolutely nuke just about any dungeon. Anything below that is certainly a bonus just because you're going to do even more damage. It is pretty incredible the amount of extra damage you put out when you go from 100 con down to 5 con. So it is helpful, but it's not an absolute must. I would strongly suggest though you get yourself to the point where you can be a light armor DPS in 100 con. So as soon as you can, work to that point of being able to survive as a DPS in light armor with 100 con. Some people do like to run medium armor, and some will go medium armor and go, low con. But honestly, I would suggest get your set in light armor. That way you're set up. If you have to, start with a little bit higher con for survivability, and slowly drop it as you get a little bit better and a little bit better. So this boss is pretty simple, pretty basic, but at 5 con, when I have the greatsword out, he can actually one-shot me. Kind of crazy to think, as easy as this guy is, but the problem is you got your greatsword out and you go into onslaught stance and you take an additional 15% damage. So what I'm doing here is I'm pulling out my greatsword when I feel it's safe, and I do the extra DPS with it. I use it for the utility, I use it to add some rend, and then I go to town pulling out my hatch. The other option I could do is I could pop a ward potion and then just go to town with my greatsword, which is an option I will do. That way that should save me from getting one tapped. even when I do have my greatsword out in the onslaught stance. But so at this point, this boss is down for the count for a while, so we pull out our greatsword, which is going to do our strongest amount of damage, and we're just going to town with it. So, kind of covered all the basics that I really want to for this first introductory video, but we will go into different combinations, different builds, and walkthroughs of all the different dungeons, including this one. We'll do a little bit of a guided walkthrough of different things you could be doing in different situations. But for now, that's really going to cover it for this video. Gonna obviously let you watch us finish off this boss, show you the scorecard. You know, not a crazy speed run or anything, but it's a respectable time. We get gold with a respectable amount of points. Nothing crazy. I think we had a few deaths. I had one of the deaths, one of the knocks, got knocked right off the map. So responsible for one of those knocks that cost us some points. But all in all, pretty solid run.